I never thought I'd find freedom at 65. For decades, I believed my worth was measured by spotless countertops and perfectly folded laundry, the invisible labor that kept our family functioning, yet somehow never counted. My hands bore the marks of 1,000 meals cooked, 1,000,000 shirts ironed, countless tears wiped away. But it wasn't until that fateful Christmas Eve, when my daughter handed out envelopes stuffed with gratitude to everyone but me, that I finally saw the truth reflected in her eyes. I was the family ghost, present but unseen, needed but unvalued, loved in theory but never respected in practice. 2 days before Christmas, I rose with the sun, my joints aching slightly as I stretched toward the pale winter light filtering through the kitchen window. The clock read 6:15 a.m. early, but there was so much to do. I pulled on my worn cardigan, the one William always suggested I replace, but never offered to buy, and headed to the farmer's market downtown. The morning air carried the crisp scent of pine and possibility as I carefully selected the ripest tomatoes, freshest herbs, and perfect mushrooms. My woven basket grew heavy with ingredients: organic russet potatoes for Jessica's favorite garlic mash, fresh thyme and rosemary from Mr. Peterson's herb stand, and a plump 6-pound free-range chicken from the Henderson family farm on the outskirts of town. "Big plans today," Eleanor asked Gladys at the cheese counter, her weathered hands offering me a sample of sharp cheddar. "My daughter's coming home," I beamed, the words tasting sweet on my tongue. "First Christmas since she started her new job in Chicago. She's been so busy, barely calls anymore." Gladys nodded knowingly. "My son's the same way. Guess that means we raised them right. Huh. Independent enough to forget about us." Her laugh held a tinge of something I should have recognized, the resigned acceptance of maternal invisibility. Back in our suburban colonial, I set to work like a conductor before a symphony. The kitchen became my orchestra pit, each burner and mixing bowl playing its part in perfect harmony. I massaged herb butter under the chicken's skin, chopped onions and celery for the stuffing, and kneaded dough for Jessica's favorite dinner rolls. The aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary gradually filled every corner of our 400-square-foot home, the one William and I had scrimped and saved 20 years to buy, though he always introduced it as my house when colleagues visited. By late afternoon, sweat dampened my brow as I pulled the golden brown chicken from the oven, whipped the mashed potatoes until they were cloud-like, and set the dining table with our best china, the Wedgwood set my mother had given us for our wedding. Pieces we only used on special occasions. The porcelain plates gleamed in the soft glow of cranberry-scented candles, a celebration waiting to happen. I stepped back to admire my handiwork, a warm satisfaction washing over me. Everything was perfect. Everything said, "Welcome home," and "You matter," and "We missed you." My heart fluttered with anticipation as I showered quickly, changed into the navy dress I'd bought specially for the occasion on clearance at Macy's. I'd never dare spend full price on myself, and perched on the edge of our leather couch, my eyes fixed on the front door, ears straining for the sound of tires on our driveway. William sat in his recliner, barely looking up from his iPad as he checked his investment portfolio. "She'll be here when she gets here. Eleanor," he sighed when I checked the clock for the 10th time. "Hovering by the door won't make her arrive any faster." Just past 7, headlights swept across the living room wall. I sprang to my feet, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my dress, a smile already warming my face. The front door swung open, and there she was, my Jessica, more polished and confident than when she'd left, her hair styled in a sophisticated bob that made her look so grown up it nearly broke my heart. I stepped forward, arms halfway raised for an embrace, but she breezed past me without a glance, making a beeline for William's outstretched arms. "Dad, I got a $5,000 bonus this year," she announced, practically bouncing with excitement. William's face illuminated with pride as he patted her head, his iPad forgotten. "That's my girl," he beamed, voice thick with the admiration he never showed me. "I always knew you'd make us proud." Meanwhile, Martha and Richard, my in-laws, swarmed around her like bees to honey. "Jessica, you are the pride of this family," Martha cooed, her voice dripping with adoration while deliberately avoiding my gaze. I stood frozen in place, a spectator at my own family gathering, the meal I'd spent hours preparing cooling on the dining room table. When I finally stepped forward to offer dinner, Jessica barely glanced in my direction. "Mom, can you not ask all these pointless little questions?" she snapped, irritation flashing across her face. "I'm trying to tell Dad about my promotion." That stinging dismissal lodged in my chest like a splinter. I nodded and retreated to the kitchen, straightening things that didn't need straightening, fighting back the hot pressure behind my eyes. Through the doorway, I watched as everyone gathered around the coffee table, where Jessica had begun distributing gift envelopes with theatrical flourish, a $1,000 gift card for William. Spa vouchers worth $300 each for her grandparents, gourmet market cards for her uncles. When her sister-in-law Emily gently prompted, "Jessica, I think you missed someone," hope briefly flickered in my chest. Jessica smacked her forehead playfully, reached into her designer bag, and pulled out a final envelope, which she then slipped into our dog Bella's rhinestone collar. "This one's for you, Bella, for being such a good girl this year," she cooed, scratching behind the terrier's ears. The silence that followed felt eternal. "Jessica, what about mine?" I finally asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Her response cut deeper than any knife ever could. "Mom, you're home all day. You don't work. You don't understand how exhausting my job is. You cook and clean. Sure, but that's your choice. You didn't help me with anything important. So why would I get you a gift?" Jessica's words hung in the air like poison. "Mom, you're home all day. You don't work. You don't understand how exhausting my job is. You cook and clean, sure, but that's your choice. You didn't help me with anything important, so why would I get you a gift?" I felt the eyes of everyone in the room, William avoiding my gaze, Martha's barely concealed smirk, Richard's uncomfortable cough. Only Emily, William's brother's wife, had the decency to look mortified. She rushed over and pulled Jessica gently toward the couch, whispering something in her ear, but Jessica wasn't finished with her performance. With the confidence of someone who believes they've done nothing wrong, she reached into her designer tote bag with a dramatic flourish. "Oh, and guess what? I booked flights for everyone to spend New Year's in Hawaii." She pulled out a stack of boarding passes, waving them like winning lottery tickets. "We leave tomorrow night." Cheers erupted around me. William clapped his hands together like an excited schoolboy. "Hawaii, that's incredible, honey." Martha's eyes widened with delight as she clutched Richard's arm. "Oh, Jessica, you're just the most thoughtful girl." I stood quietly, trying to process this new information. No gift was one thing hurtful, yes, but perhaps I'd grown too sensitive over the years. But a family vacation. This had to include me. After all, what's a family trip without, well, the entire family? I'd never been to Hawaii. In fact, I'd barely left the state in 20 years. always putting everyone else's needs before my own dreams of travel. "This is wonderful, Jessica," I said, forcing a smile. Despite everything, a small flutter of excitement began to build. Maybe this was her way of making amends, a grand gesture rather than a small gift. "I've always wanted to see Hawaii. When do we leave?" The room fell silent again. Jessica raised her perfectly manicured eyebrows, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Mom, you're not coming." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "I need you to stay and watch Bella. She'd be miserable at a kennel, and you're the perfect person for the job." Perfect person for the job. Not perfect person to share memories with. Not perfect person to deserve a vacation after decades of service. Perfect person to be the dog sitter while the real family enjoyed paradise. I must have looked as if I'd been slapped, because Emily stepped forward, concern etched across her face. "Jessica, don't you think it's just practical?" Jessica interrupted, not even looking at me as she distributed the boarding passes. "Mom doesn't even like swimming, and she burns easily. She's better off here." I waited for William to interject, to say anything in my defense. But he was already examining his boarding pass, discussing seat assignments with Richard as if I weren't standing right there. Invisible, once again. That was the moment. That precise moment when something in me, something that had been bending for decades, stretching thinner and thinner under the weight of thankless years, finally, irrevocably snapped. Rage bubbled up in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. Before I could stop myself, I swung my arm and sent the plate of homemade Christmas cookies crashing to the floor. The shattering sound rang through the room like a gunshot, silencing everyone instantly. "Eleanor!" Martha shot up from her seat, her voice sharp and shrill. "What on earth is wrong with you?" Richard's brow furrowed with disapproval, shaking his head slowly, as if I'd committed some unforgivable social sin. "You've just ruined the entire evening." William finally looked at me, but not with concern, with embarrassment and anger. "Eleanor," he hissed, his face darkening, "get a hold of yourself. You're being ridiculous." Martha turned to William, her voice dripping with venom. "William, marrying a woman like this, you've been cursed from day one." Jessica blinked, her momentary shock quickly replaced with practiced disdain. "Oh my God, Mom, seriously, it's just a trip to Hawaii. Don't be so dramatic. I'll take you next time when I get another bonus." Well, now everyone's upset. Happy. William's brother Jason opened his mouth as if to say something, but Emily grabbed his hand and shook her head, silently warning him not to get involved. I let out a cold, bitter laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "So this is what it takes for all of you to notice me, huh? I have to break something just to remind you I exist." I looked around at their shocked faces, suddenly seeing them all with perfect clarity. 42 years of marriage, 20 years raising a child, thousands of meals cooked, holidays planned, tears wiped, messes cleaned. And I'm nothing more than the help. William's patience snapped. He pointed at the shattered plate on the floor, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous you're being right now? This was supposed to be a joyful family gathering, but no, you had to ruin it with this temper tantrum. If you can't handle this, then go. No one's stopping you." The irony stung like alcohol on an open wound. I wasn't family. I was the unpaid maid, the living dog sitter, the invisible caretaker who cooked, cleaned, and got ignored. For 20 years, I'd swallowed disappointment after disappointment, telling myself things would change, that one day they'd see me, really see me, and appreciate what I'd given up for them. But standing there, Looking at their indignant faces, I finally understood the truth. They would never see me because they'd never been looking. With hands that suddenly felt steadier than they had in years, I yanked off my apron, the symbol of my servitude, and tossed it aside, without a word. I walked calmly to our bedroom, pulled out the leather suitcase from under the bed, and began filling it with whatever clothes were closest. Just as I zipped it closed, Emily rushed in, catching my arm with gentle fingers. "Eleanor, don't. It's late. Where will you even go?" She looked back and called out, "Jessica, talk to your mom. Don't let her walk out like this." From the living room, Jessica's bored voice drifted in. "Let her go. What's she going to do? Run back to her mommy's house? She throws tantrums all the time. She'll be back tomorrow like she always is." I stood there, stunned by the casual cruelty in my daughter's voice. 42 years of marriage, 20 years of motherhood, all of it summed up in one dismissive sentence. If my mother, God rest her soul, ever heard how I was spoken to tonight, it would break her heart all over again. I gently shook off Emily's hand, picked up my suitcase, and walked straight out the front door without looking back. The night air was crisp against my face, carrying the scent of pine from our neighbor's Christmas tree. For the first time in decades, each breath felt like my own. Standing on the sidewalk outside our home, no, William's home, I pulled out my cell phone and stared at the screen. It was 9:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and for the first time in 42 years, I had nowhere to go. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Mom. My mother had passed away 3 years ago, but I'd never had the heart to delete her number. How I wished I could call her now. Hear her steady voice telling me everything would be all right. Instead, I called Lillian, my older sister. She answered on the third ring. Holiday music playing softly in the background. "Hello, Eleanor, is everything okay? It's late." "Lil," I said, my voice steady but hollow. "I'm not coming for Christmas dinner tomorrow. I need some time away. Maybe I'll take a little trip." She paused for a few seconds, then replied gently, "That sounds like a good idea. Honey, a change of scenery might do you some good." Then, after a moment, she added, "Remember I told you I was thinking of selling the old house in Montclair Well? It's done. The sale went through and the money's in. I can send some your way." She could hear something was off, but she didn't push. That was Lillian always supporting quietly and completely. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Lil, I'm okay. I don't need anything right now, but thank you. If I ever do, I'll ask. I mean it. Thank you for always being there." She agreed with a soft, "mm-hmm," that said more than words could. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed with a notification. Lillian had transferred $20,000 into my account. The note read, "To my dearest sister, go have the time of your life. Clem." That's the thing about having a sister who has your back. It gives you the courage to walk away from anything that doesn't honor you, even after 65 years of playing by everyone else's rules. That night, I checked into the Fairmont Hotel downtown. The young woman at the reception desk raised her eyebrows slightly when I said I had no luggage beyond my small overnight bag, but she quickly regained her professional composure. "Just one night, Mrs. Cooper." "I'm not sure yet," I replied, surprising myself with the honesty. "Maybe more." "No problem at all," she said, typing efficiently. "We'll put you in one of our City View rooms on the 12th floor. Would you like a wake-up call for tomorrow? No, I said, feeling the strangest sense of lightness. I think I'll sleep as long as I want. The room was beautiful, crisp white linens, a plush armchair by the window, a marble bathroom with thick towels and fancy toiletries I immediately tucked into my bag. For the first time in decades, I lay in a bed that was truly mine, ordered a glass of wine from room service without checking the price, and closed my eyes in perfect, uninterrupted peace. No one needed me to do anything. No one expected me to be anywhere. The silence was exquisite. Early the next morning, Christmas Day, just as I settled by the hotel window with a cup of room service coffee, my phone rang. It was William. I hesitated, then picked up. Eleanor. His voice was low but brimming with irritation. How long are you planning to keep this up? Come home now. I went by Lillian's place. She said you never showed up. I don't care where you are. Just get back here. I didn't say a word. I simply ended the call, turned my phone to silent, and continued watching the city wake up on Christmas morning. Who did he think I was? The housekeeper, some on-call servant he could summon with a snap of his fingers. The nerve of that man to bark orders like he still had any claim over me. Moments later, my phone lit up with a flood of texts from Jessica. Mom, seriously, aren't you too old to be acting like this? Going missing in action just to get attention? How immature can you be? Che, we're flying to Hawaii tonight. If you don't come back, who's going to watch Bella? If anything happens to Bella, I'll never forgive you. I stared at her messages, lips curling into a bitter smile. This was my daughter, the one I'd raised with my own 2 hands, speaking to me like this. I once held her like a treasure, this tiny, perfect human who'd made me feel complete. Now she saw me as nothing but a burden, a utility. Tears welled up again, but this time I let them fall freely onto the hotel bathrobe, and I swore it would be the last time I cried over people who couldn't see my worth. I remembered when Jessica was little, so sweet and full of love. She used to wrap her tiny arms around my neck and whisper, Mommy, you're the best mommy in the whole wide world. When I grow up, I'm going to buy you the prettiest dress. I could still picture her cuddled in my lap, all softness and unguarded smiles. But after elementary school, she changed. Her focus shifted away from home, away from me. William said she needed more attention, more support to succeed academically. He pushed me to quit my job at the library, a position I'd loved, surrounded by books and quiet purpose. Without a second thought, I resigned. I became a full-time mom, putting everything else aside for her. But the older she got, the colder she became. Stop coming to parent-teacher conferences, she'd snapped one day, storming into the house after 8th grade. Everyone knows you're just a housewife. It's embarrassing. You can't help me with algebra or science. What's the point of you sitting around all day? You don't bring in money, and you still argue with Dad. Over and over, I told myself, she's still young. One day she'll understand. I waited through high school, through college. I thought that once she entered the real world, she'd see what it all meant, the sacrifices, the invisible work of building a life around the people you love. But no, this was what I got in return. 20 years of silent, invisible sacrifice. And now I stood here, 65 years old, staring at a daughter I could barely recognize. Around noon on Christmas Day, she sent a final string of messages. Nice going. You've officially screwed up everyone's plans. We're flying out at 4 p.m. Don't bother coming back. If you're not home by then, don't expect to be my mom anymore. Perfect, because I was just about ready to stop being her mother, too. I opened my email and sent William the finalized divorce papers I'd been quietly preparing for months. One line in the body: "Please sign promptly. If you refuse, I'll proceed through court." Then I powered off my phone, picked up my suitcase, and walked confidently through the hotel lobby toward the taxi stand outside. The doorman nodded respectfully as he held the door for me. "Where to, ma'am?" "The airport, please. Taking a Christmas trip," he asked kindly, helping me into the cab. "Something like that." I replied with a small smile. "I'm going to Iceland." He looked surprised. "Iceland? In December it'll be mighty cold up there." "That's what I'm counting on," I said. "I've been too warm for too long." And just like that, I boarded a plane to a land of frost and silence, a place where the darkness of winter gives way to the most spectacular light shows on earth. A fitting metaphor for the first clear-headed holiday of my life. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched America fall away beneath me. I wasn't running from my problems. For the first time in decades, I was running toward myself, toward the woman I'd set aside in service to others, the one with dreams and desires and dignity. At 65, most people think the adventure is over. They're settling in, winding down, accepting the lives they've built, whether they fit anymore or not. But as the plane cut through the clouds and the seatbelt sign dinged off, I realized something profound. This wasn't the end of my story. It was finally, gloriously, the beginning. 3 days into my Icelandic adventure, I sat in a small cafe in Reykjavik, watching snow fall like tiny stars against the window pane. The cafe was warm and snug, with wooden beams overhead and the rich scent of coffee mingling with freshly baked cinnamon bread. My hands curled around the ceramic mug as I finally powered my phone back on. There was something about being thousands of miles from home that made me brave enough to face whatever waited for me in the digital world. As expected, my inbox immediately flooded with notifications. 37 missed calls from William, 23 from Jessica, dozens of text messages ranging from rage to feigned concern. I scrolled past them, unmoved by their sudden interest in my whereabouts. Where was this attention when I was right in front of them, making their meals and organizing their lives? Instead, I opened Lillian's email, sent yesterday, with the subject line, "Financial Freedom Plan." "Dearest Eleanor, I hope Iceland is treating you well. I've imagined you watching the northern lights, wrapped in one of those gorgeous Icelandic wool sweaters, finally taking a moment for yourself. I've been on the phone with my financial advisor, Gerald, who also happens to be a divorce attorney. Remember that mess with Frank 3 years ago? I've attached several documents I need you to review. The $20,000 transfer was just the beginning. The house in Montclair sold for $575,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and closing costs, there's $430,000 left. Half of that is already yours. Mom and Dad left it to both of us. That's $215,000. Eleanor, your money, not William's, not Jessica's, yours alone. Gerald says timing is everything. You need to act quickly to protect yourself financially. Call me when you can. All my love." Lil, I stared at the numbers, blinking back tears. $215,000. More money than I'd ever had access to in my entire life. William had always controlled our finances. "You're not good with numbers, Eleanor," he'd say dismissively whenever I asked about our accounts. In 42 years of marriage, I'd never had a credit card in my own name. My small library salary had gone directly into our joint account, which he monitored like a hawk, questioning every purchase I made. When I quit my job to care for Jessica full-time, I'd lost the last bit of financial autonomy I had. Every dollar I needed came from William's wallet, each expenditure requiring justification. Even Jessica's college fund was in his name only for tax purposes, he'd claimed. I took a deep breath and dialed Lillian's number. Despite the 5-hour time difference, she answered immediately. There she is. How's Iceland? It's beautiful. Lil, thank you doesn't begin to cover what you've done for me. Nonsense. It was always half yours. I just held on to it until you needed it. Her voice grew serious. Eleanor, have you checked your credit score recently? My credit score, I echoed, confused. I doubt I even have one. Everything's been in William's name for decades. That's what I was afraid of. Gerald says this is common in situations like yours. We need to establish your financial identity immediately. Over the next hour, Lillian walked me through a detailed plan. First, open a bank account in my name, only at a different bank from the one William and I used. Have the house proceeds wired directly there. Apply for a secured credit card to begin building my own credit history. Set up online banking with complex passwords William couldn't guess. What about taxes? I asked, anxiety creeping in. William always handled our taxes. The money from the house is inheritance, Eleanor. Gerald says it's generally not considered marital property in most states, especially since you received it after your separation. But you need to document everything. When you get back to the States, we'll set you up with an accountant of your own. By the time we hung up, I had a Google document filled with action items and a strange new feeling in my chest, the unfamiliar weight of financial responsibility coupled with the exhilarating lightness of financial independence. That afternoon, I used the hotel's business center to open my first solo bank account online. The hotel concierge helped me find a notary public to sign the required documents, which I then shipped overnight to the bank's headquarters. Within 48 hours, I had account numbers, online access, and a wire transfer in progress. The same day, I received an email from William's lawyer demanding I cease spending marital assets on frivolous international travel and return home immediately to discuss the disposition of joint property. I forwarded it to Lillian without comment. An hour later, she connected me with Gerald. Mrs. Cooper, Gerald Friedman here. I understand you're dealing with a controlling spouse situation. His direct approach was refreshing. No judgment, just facts. Yes, I replied. My husband of 42 years thinks he owns me along with everything else. Classic case, Gerald said matter-of-factly. I see this all the time with long-term marriages where one spouse has been financially dependent. Here's what we're going to do. Gerald explained that I needed to document everything my separation date, William's controlling behaviors, every penny I spent and why. He advised me to avoid using any joint accounts or credit cards tied to William. Use only the money your sister gave you. Keep your new accounts completely separate. And whatever you do, don't sign anything William or his lawyer sends you. I've never handled legal matters before, I admitted. William always said I wasn't good at paperwork. Gerald chuckled. With all due respect, Mrs. Cooper, I doubt that's true. Controlling partners often undermine their spouse's confidence to maintain power. You raised a child, ran a household, and kept a marriage going for over 4 decades. I'm pretty sure you can handle some legal forms. His confidence in me was like water to parched earth. I found myself sitting straighter, speaking more clearly. 2 days later, I received another email from William. This one with no legal letterhead, just raw fury. He'd discovered the money from Lillian. How dare you hide assets from me that money came in during our marriage? Half of it is legally mine. I've already spoken to my lawyer about this little deception of yours. Reading his words, I felt a momentary panic. Was he right? Could he claim Lillian's gift? I forwarded the email to Gerald, who called me immediately. This is intimidation, Mrs. Cooper, not legal fact. The timing works in your favor. Your sister transferred the money after you left the marital home. You were already separated. Moreover, inheritance is usually considered separate property in most jurisdictions, even during marriage. Don't engage with him directly. Let me handle it. That night, I sat on my hotel balcony wrapped in blankets, watching the night sky for any glimpse of the aurora borealis. The weather forecast said conditions were favorable, but you never knew. With nature, she revealed her wonders on her own schedule. Much like freedom, I thought, it comes when it's ready, not when you are. As if on cue, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the bank, confirming that the wire transfer from Lillian was complete. $15,000 was now securely in my account. My account. 2 simple words that held such monumental meaning. For the first time since I was 23 years old, I had money that wasn't tied to William. I could spend it without explanation, save it without permission, invest it without approval. The realization brought tears to my eyes. Just then, a flicker of green appeared in the night sky, faint at first, then growing stronger. Rippling curtains of emerald light began to dance across the darkness, shimmering and pulsing as if alive. The Northern Lights, aurora borealis, nature's most spectacular light show. I stood transfixed, watching the celestial display with wonder. How fitting that on the night I gained financial freedom, the sky itself would celebrate with such magnificence. I thought of all the nights I'd spent in that suburban colonial, constrained by invisible chains, never imagining I could witness such beauty. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of myself silhouetted against the dancing lights, my first selfie at 65. I posted it to Instagram with a simple caption, "Freedom feels like this. Never too late. Northern Lights, new beginnings." Within minutes, Lillian responded with a row of heart emojis and a message. "Look at you, little sister, claiming your place under those magical lights. This is just the beginning." She was right. With financial independence came real choices, the first I'd had in decades. I could extend my stay in Iceland, visit other countries, or return to the States and establish a new home. I could take classes, start a business, volunteer, travel. For the first time in my adult life, the future wasn't prescribed by someone else's expectations. As the Northern Lights continued their ethereal dance above me, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today, I am wealthy in more ways than one. I have money in the bank, yes, but more importantly, I have ownership of my destiny. At 65, most would say my story is winding down, but tonight, under these magical lights, I know with absolute certainty that my greatest chapters are yet to be written. Eleanor, your husband made his move." Gerald's voice came through my phone with the practiced calm of someone who'd seen it all before. I had just poured my morning coffee in the small kitchenette of my extended stay apartment. After 3 weeks in Iceland and a brief stop in Norway, I'd returned to the States, not to William's house, but to a modest furnished apartment I'd leased month to month in Morningside Heights. "Zach filed a petition with the court," Gerald continued. "He's trying to claim part of your trust fund." I let out a quiet laugh that held no humor. "Of course he is. He's arguing that the money your sister gave you was transferred during the marriage, so it should be considered marital property subject to equitable distribution." I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. The view from my fifth-floor window showed a slice of Central Park in the distance, trees bare against the February sky. This apartment cost more per month than I'd ever been allowed to spend on anything, but it was mine, and the freedom was worth every penny. "That's ridiculous," but I said finally. "Lillian transferred that money after I moved out, after I officially separated from William. It wasn't a wedding gift or a joint inheritance. She sent it when she saw I needed to escape." "Exactly," Gerald agreed. "The timing works in our favor. But William's trying to twist the narrative. His claim states, and I'm quoting here, while the funds originated from the petitioner's sister, the transfer occurred during the legal marriage. As such, both parties had theoretical access and shared entitlement. Then, in what Gerald described as a final flourish of audacity, William had added, "I have no objection to these funds being used to support the family and our daughter's future needs." There it was. Not about supporting me in my golden years or acknowledging my decades of unpaid labor. No, this was about regaining control, about funding his next chapter while keeping Jessica financially dependent on him and, by extension, on me. "He never changes, does he?" I murmured. "Men like William rarely do." Gerald replied, "They just get more desperate when they realize their control is slipping." We spent the next hour preparing our response. We submitted all relevant documents the transfer date 2 weeks after I had moved out and officially separated, bank statements showing the receiving account was newly created under my name. Only William had no access, no prior knowledge. And most damning of all, the text Lillian sent me the day she wired the funds. "Don't give him a single cent. This is the first time in your life you get to spend money on yourself." This wasn't simply a financial dispute. This was William finally showing his true colors, terrified not of divorce itself, but of losing power over me and the money that gave me options. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and bright. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal pantsuit I'd purchased specifically for this occasion, pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, and low heels that wouldn't echo too loudly on the courthouse floors, professional, dignified, and utterly unlike the meek housewife William expected me to be. The county courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. As I walked through the security checkpoint, I spotted William near the elevator banks, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to Jessica's college graduation 3 years ago. He'd aged in the months since I'd left his face more lined, his posture slightly stooped. For a moment, something like pity stirred in me. Then I remembered how he'd dismissed me for decades, and my spine straightened. In the courtroom, we sat at separate tables, the physical distance between us symbolic of the emotional chasm. William's attorney spoke first, his voice dripping with feigned reasonableness. "Your Honor, Mr. Cooper simply wants clarity on marital assets. Both he and Mrs. Cooper have a responsibility to their daughter Jessica, who's just starting her career. These funds, regardless of their source, came into the marriage before divorce proceedings began." Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. "Your Honor, these funds were a personal gift from Eleanor Cooper's sister, designated solely for her use after separation. Mr. Cooper had no involvement in the transfer or management of those funds. Furthermore," he added, sliding a folder across to the judge, "Mr. Cooper has engaged in multiple acts of financial misconduct throughout the marriage, including unapproved loans and fund transfers that compromised marital financial trust." The evidence packet contained screenshots of the wire transfer, the transaction note, Lillian's text, and most damaging of all, copies of loan documents William had once casually asked me to sign real quick for his business ventures. Back when he thought I was too intimidated to read the fine print, I heard William exhale sharply across the room. In 42 years of marriage, he'd never imagined I'd keep records. He'd never thought the little papers he'd slipped under my nose would someday become Exhibit A in the case against him. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, wasn't impressed by William's claims. After reviewing the evidence, she looked up and delivered her ruling in one concise statement. It is evident that these funds were a post-separation personal gift from Lillian Mitchell to Eleanor Cooper. Mr. Cooper has no legal claim to them. She said it with professional grace, but the message was crystal clear, William. Keep your hands off my money. Outside the courthouse. Gerald handed me a coffee as we stood on the stone steps. The February wind whipped around us as I watched William talk with his flustered attorney across the plaza. You know what he's really afraid of? Gerald asked, adjusting his scarf against the cold. Enlighten me. He's not afraid of being broke. He's afraid you're not. Gerald's eyes crinkled at the corners. He's afraid that you can spend money now without asking his permission. I laughed quietly. No. What scares him most isn't the divorce. It's the fact that I left, and I'm doing better without him. I glanced down at the court document in my hand. Across the top it read, "Divorce petition officially filed," and those 5 plain printed words felt more comforting than any vow William had ever made. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Mom, this has gone far enough. Dad says you're taking everything. How could you do this to our family? I'm coming over to talk some sense into you. Send me your address. I showed the message to Gerald, who raised an eyebrow. Are you ready for that conversation? He asked. I've been rehearsing it for 20 years. I replied. 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica standing in the hallway, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Mom, she started, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the apartment critically. This place is small. It's just right for one person, I replied, closing the door behind her. She turned to face me, arms crossed. Gone was the smug corporate climber from Christmas. This Jessica looked worried, almost fragile. Dad says you're trying to bankrupt him with this divorce. He says you're taking advantage of outdated alimony laws to punish him. I gestured toward the small living room sofa. Would you like to sit? She remained standing. Mom, be reasonable. You've never had to support yourself. You need Dad. The old Eleanor would have flinched at those words, would have rushed to smooth things over. But that woman was gone. Jessica, I supported myself for years before I met your father. I worked at the library while putting myself through college. I had my own apartment, paid my own bills. The only reason I stopped working was because your father insisted after you were born. She blinked, momentarily thrown off script. But that was decades ago. Things are different now. Yes, they are, I agreed. Now I have 42 years of experience running a household, managing schedules, solving problems, and keeping peace. Those are valuable skills, ones your father benefited from without compensation. Compensation. Her voice rose. He supported you. He paid for everything. Did he? I asked quietly. Or did we support each other? His career advanced because I handled everything else. He worked 60-hour weeks because I raised you, maintained our home, managed his parents' needs, organized his social calendar, and planned every holiday and family event. If he had hired people to do everything I did, it would have cost him a fortune. Jessica's face flushed. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Partners supporting each other. Exactly, I said. Partners, not employer and unpaid staff, not dictator and subject. Partners who respect each other's contributions. So I stepped closer, holding her gaze. Your father never saw me as an equal partner deserving of respect. And somewhere along the way, you learned to see me the same way. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, my daughter had no ready response. Jessica, I didn't come to your workplace and criticize your performance. I didn't dismiss your contribution to this family. All I did was finally stand up for myself after decades of being invisible. If that threatens you and your father, you might want to ask yourselves why. She sank onto the sofa then, suddenly looking very young. What are we supposed to do now Dad can barely microwave a meal? The house is a mess. I felt a flicker of sympathy, quickly replaced by resolve. You're both adults. You'll figure it out, just like I'm figuring out my new life. I paused. Or you could hire a housekeeper and pay them properly for their work. And when Jessica left an hour later, nothing was resolved between us. She didn't apologize for Christmas or for the years of dismissal. But something had shifted. She'd really seen me, perhaps for the first time since she was a little girl. That night, I stood at my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk fell. The divorce would take months, possibly a year to finalize. There would be more hearings, more attempts by William to claim what wasn't his. But something fundamental had changed today. I had faced them both, husband and daughter, and I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't apologized for taking up space or for having needs of my own. After 65 years of shrinking myself to fit into other people's expectations, I was finally expanding into the full measure of my worth, and it felt magnificent. The day I walked out of that courtroom, divorce decree in hand, I didn't go straight home to my apartment. Instead, I took a detour to the Morningside Heights Public Library, a grand limestone building with wide steps and tall windows. Its quiet dignity had always called to me, even during those years when William had dismissed my love of libraries as quaint and old-fashioned. I climbed the steps slowly, savoring each moment. Inside, the familiar scent of books and polished wood wrapped around me like an old friend's embrace. At the volunteer services desk, I asked for an application form. "Are you interested in volunteering with us?" asked the coordinator. A woman about my age with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. "I am," I replied. "It's been a dream of mine for a long time." She smiled warmly. "We're always looking for dedicated people. Do you have any library experience?" "I worked in the university library while putting myself through college, and I have a degree in English literature," I said, surprising myself with how easily I claimed these long-buried accomplishments. That was over 40 years ago, but books and I have remained on intimate terms. 2 days later, I sat through an orientation session alongside 3 college students and a retired history professor. The library director, Ms. Patel, explained the various volunteer positions shelving books, helping with Children's Story Hour, assisting patrons with research questions, and aiding seniors with computer literacy. "Which area interests you most, Eleanor?" she asked. Without hesitation, I replied, "I'd like to help with the senior computer sessions and maybe the research desk when I've learned enough about your systems." Back when Jessica was in elementary school, I'd suggested similar volunteer work at our local library. William had laughed. "What's that going to pay you? You're better off staying home with Jessica." So I'd let the dream go, burying it beneath casseroles and carpools and carefully maintained peace. But now, at 65, I lived for no one but myself, and I figured it was time to try the life I once imagined. 3 days later, I was sitting at the volunteer desk by the library's front window, greeting my first visitor, an older woman with arthritic hands who needed help printing her Social Security application. I guided her to the computer lab, showed her how to access the government website, helped her navigate through the form, and printed the required documents. When she struggled to read the small print, I read the critical sections aloud, making sure she understood each part before signing. As she was leaving, she squeezed my hand and said, "You're more patient than my own daughter." I smiled, thanking her softly. I'd heard such words before, only back then. They never counted because no one in my family believed them. But this time was different. This time I'd earned them on my own terms. Spring arrived with a burst of daffodils in the park across from the library. I'd been volunteering 3 days a week for 2 months, and my schedule had expanded to include a weekly book club for retired teachers and a technology troubleshooting session for seniors bringing in their phones and tablets. The work brought me joy, not the anxious, people-pleasing kind of joy I'd manufactured for decades, but a genuine contentment that came from being useful, appreciated, and engaged with the world on my own terms. My divorce had finalized faster than expected. William had eventually realized that fighting would only drain his resources and reveal more about his financial manipulation. In the end, he'd settled, granting me a fair portion of our assets, plus the inheritance from Lillian. Gerald called it a victory. I called it freedom. One bright April afternoon, I was walking home from the library when I decided to stop at the small park on East 96th Street. I sat on a bench, opening the lunch container I'd packed that morning, a simple salad with grilled chicken and homemade vinaigrette. As I ate, I watched children playing, mothers chatting, and elderly couples strolling arm in arm. An older woman with a walker passed by. Glancing at me and my solitary meal, she paused, leaning slightly on her walker. "Eating alone?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. I nodded. She nodded back. Me too. Divorced at 63, lived alone and dined alone for 15 years. And the meals just keep getting better. I couldn't help but laugh. "Weren't you scared back then?" She looked me straight in the eye, her grin etched with steel. Of course I was. But being scared is still better than living with a man who sees you as the help. She settled herself on the bench beside me, unwrapping her own sandwich from waxed paper. "I'm Irene Goldberg," she said, not offering her hand, but inclining her head in a small, dignified nod. "Eleanor Cooper," I replied. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, eating our respective lunches. I didn't know her story, and she didn't know mine, but there was a quiet solidarity between us two women who had chosen independence over invisibility. "Do you come here often?" I finally asked. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, after my physical therapy," she said. "The therapist says I should walk more, but he doesn't have titanium hips." She patted her sides with a wry smile. "And you?" "I volunteer at the library on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Today was a good day. I helped a veteran set up email so he could communicate with his grandson overseas." Irene nodded approvingly. "Useful work. Me, I teach piano to neighborhood children twice a week. Keeps the mind sharp and the heart young." And we talked easily after that, discovering mutual interests in classical music, mystery novels, and a shared disdain for the local supermarket's produce selection. Before we parted, we exchanged phone numbers, my first new friend in over a decade. That evening, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from William. his first direct communication since the divorce had finalized Eleanor. I hope this email finds you well. Circumstances have changed since your departure. The house needs significant repairs, and the board position I've held for 15 years has been eliminated in a company restructuring. Jessica suggested I reach out to inquire if you might consider a reconciliation. After all, we shared 42 years together. Perhaps we could meet for coffee to discuss possibilities. William. I read it twice, noting what wasn't said, no apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior, no recognition of my worth beyond my utility in managing his home. Just practical concerns about his comfort and finances, thinly veiled as sentimentality. 5 years ago, even 6 months ago, I might have wavered. I might have told myself that marriage was about compromise, about weathering storms together, about forgiveness at any cost. But now I recognized the familiar pattern. William needed something from me, so he was willing to temporarily treat me as if I mattered. I typed a brief reply. William, I wish you well in your new circumstances, but reconciliation is not possible. Our marriage ended long before I left the house. It ended each time you diminished me, each time you taught Jessica that my work had no value, each time you controlled my movements and my money as if I were a child rather than a partner. I am building a life that honors who I am now. I hope you find a way to do the same. Eleanor. I pressed send without hesitation or regret, then slipped on a light jacket and headed out for an evening walk. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. As I strolled through the neighborhood, I recalled a conversation I'd had with Lillian just last week. Have you heard from Jessica? She'd asked cautiously. Not since our confrontation in my apartment, I replied. She's been silent for over a month. Ken, are you going to reach out to her? I'd considered the question carefully. Not yet. For now, I need to focus on building my own foundation. If Jessica wants to be part of my life, she'll need to see me as a person worthy of respect, not just as mom who exists to serve her needs. And if she doesn't come around, Lillian had asked softly, then I'll have to accept that too. I'd answered, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I've spent decades trying to earn love through servitude. I won't spend what remains of my life that way. Now, as twilight settled over the city, I felt the truth of those words even more deeply. The old Eleanor, the one who cooked perfect meals that went unappreciated, who silenced her own needs to keep the peace, who believed her worth was measured in others' approval, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that a life half-lived was not really a life at all. I turned toward home, my steps light despite the day's fatigue. My apartment was small but filled with items that brought me joy, books I'd always wanted to read, artwork that spoke to me, comfortable furniture arranged exactly how I liked it. No one questioned my choices or criticized my taste. No one monitored my spending or demanded justification for my purchases. On my nightstand sat a journal, its pages gradually filling with observations, plans, and reflections. Tonight I would add another entry. Today I declined reconciliation with William. Today I chose myself again. At 65, most women in my generation had been taught that our stories were winding down, that our most important chapters were behind us. But as I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my own creation, I knew with absolute certainty that my most meaningful chapters were just beginning. For the first time in my adult life, I was the author of my own story, and I intended to make it a masterpiece. Friends, Eleanor's journey from invisible wife to empowered woman speaks directly to anyone who's ever felt erased in their own life. Her story reminds us of a profound truth. You are never too old to reclaim your worth for decades. Eleanor poured herself into a family that treated her as furniture, present but unseen, needed but unvalued. She surrendered her dreams, her financial independence, and even her identity to serve people who couldn't see her worth. How many of us do the same? How many of us shrink ourselves to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold our full magnificence? Eleanor's awakening at 65 teaches us that there is no expiration date on personal dignity. There is no timeline for self-discovery. The moment you decide to honor your worth is the moment your real life begins, whether you're 25 or 75. The most powerful line in Eleanor's story comes when she tells her daughter, "I've spent decades trying to earn love through servitude. I won't spend what remains of my life that way." What a revelation. Love that must be earned through self-erasure isn't love at all. It's emotional imprisonment. If Eleanor's journey resonates with you, I invite you to ask yourself, where in your life are you silencing your own voice? What dreams have you shelved for the convenience of others? What would happen if, like Eleanor, you decided that today is the day you begin writing your own story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced a midlife awakening? Have you watched someone you love find their voice after years of silence? Or are you standing at the edge of your own transformation, gathering courage for that first step? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that illuminate the human experience and remind us that our greatest chapters might still be waiting to be written. Like Eleanor discovered at 65, it's never too late to become the author of your own life.